The fog rolled thick over Queens Boulevard, swallowing lamplight and muffling the sound of carriage wheels on wet cobblestone. The courthouse clock struck midnight, and a small gathering of reporters stood ready, pens sharpened, to record the sensational trial of the heiress Madeline Fairfax. But before she could mount the courthouse steps to face her fate, Madeline collapsed, her silken scarf fluttering like a wounded bird as she fell. Gasps rippled through the crowd. By the time the police pushed forward, she was gone, dead. And so it was that Hercule Poirot, master of the little gray cells, found himself summoned to untangle a vanishing heiress's final mystery. Chapter 1. The Heiress and the Courthouse. The fog of Queens Boulevard was not the clean, brisk mist of morning dew, but rather a heavy, lingering shroud that seemed to press upon the skin. It swirled about the iron lampposts, dimming their yellow halos, and muffled the slow clip-clop of horses' hooves on wet cobblestone. Somewhere in the distance, a motor car coughed and rattled, its engine swallowed by the damp air before it could declare itself fully. The courthouse loomed through it all, a granite temple to law and justice, whose steps glistened slick beneath the gaslights. At the stroke of midnight, the clock upon its tower tolled with a ponderous authority, each note rolling out into the night, as if to remind the city that time and judgment wait for no soul, not even the rich. Reporters had gathered at the foot of those steps, huddled in their overcoats, hats pulled low. Their notebooks rested like weapons in their hands, sharpened and ready to strike. They smoked cheap cigarettes to keep the damp at bay, and exchanged murmurs about the woman who would arrive that night, Madeline Fairfax. The very name seemed to ripple through the fog like a rumor. The Fairfax Shipping Company had dominated transatlantic trade for decades, and with her father's death, the empire had passed, almost wheels. A motor car drew into the square, its headlights cutting white slashes through the fog. It halted at the steps, and out stepped Madeline Fairfax. She was dressed not for the dock nor the gallows, but as if she were to attend an evening recital. A long coat of black wool trimmed with fur, gloves of soft kid leather, and a silken scarf that gleamed faintly even in the dim light. Her face, pale and oval, was framed by a cloche hat pulled low upon her brow. She carried herself with poise, but the tension in her jaw betrayed something beneath the surface. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. The reporters surged forward, their questions like pebbles flung at a window. "Miss Fairfax, is it true you intend to accuse Judge Blackwood? Did you fund the Fairchild shipment? Have you betrayed the syndicate?" Her lips moved, but no sound carried. She pressed forward up the steps, each stride deliberate, almost theatrical. And then, as the midnight bell ceased its tolling, Madeline Fairfax faltered. Her hand went to her throat, the silken scarf fluttered loose as if caught by a phantom breeze, and her body crumpled upon the stone steps. Gasps tore from the crowd. A woman shrieked. Reporters stumbled backward, clutching their notebooks like shields. For an instant, the fog itself seemed to freeze, holding its breath. By the time two policemen reached her side, Madeline Fairfax was gone. No cry, no struggle. The heiress had simply collapsed, extinguished like a candle in the damp air. It was at that moment, stepping neatly out from the shadows, that a figure of compact build, with egg-shaped head and an immaculately waxed mustache approached the body. His shoes gleamed, his suit pressed to military precision, and though the night's fog dampened all else, it did not dare touch his perfect attire. "Hercule Poirot," murmured one of the reporters, half in awe, half in relief. Poirot knelt beside the fallen woman. His eyes, sharp and glimmering with calculation, surveyed the scene. No wound marred the friend's side. "Fainted, perhaps. No. Dead. Lord above." Poirot rose, his expression unreadable. "Indeed, mon cher Japp. Dead, and most mysteriously so. No weapon, no mark. A disappearance of life as sudden as the extinguishing of a match. But look, observe the scene, if you please. It tells us a tale." Japp squinted at the steps. "Looks to me like she dropped stone dead, that's all. Heart, perhaps." Poirot wagged a finger. "Always you leap to the ordinary. But tell me, why here, upon the courthouse steps, before the eyes of so many? If it were but the failure of the heart, why such timing, such performance? No, no. There is design in this death, I promise you." Japp grunted, unconvinced, but he knew better than to argue outright with Poirot in his element. The body was carried within the courthouse, laid upon a table in a dimly lit chamber. Reporters were held at bay, though their scratching pens could be heard like restless insects beyond the doors. Poirot moved slowly about the room, hands clasped behind his back. He observed the gloves, unbuttoned as though loosened moments before. He examined the scarf, its threads catching faintly on his fingertip. He noted her handbag, closed but not clasped. "Everything, you see," he murmured, "is too arranged. This is not the collapse of nature. This is the stage of the crime." Japp sighed. "Well, if it is murder, what's your guess? Poison?" Poirot raised his brows. "Ah, poison. The weapon most insidious, most silent. And yet, mon ami, I do not guess. I observe. And I see here not merely the death of a woman, but the prologue of a drama." He turned to the inspector. "Already I can tell you this. She was expected to speak. Someone feared her words. They arranged that she would never utter them, to silence a voice. This is the true motive always." "And who would that be?" Japp asked. Poirot's mustache twitched. "That, my friend, is the edge of the courthouse steps, eyes lowered, his cane tapping faintly against the stones. To Japp, who followed, it appeared as if Poirot were measuring each slab, every drop of moisture. He bent, touched the stone, sniffed the air, even peered at a stray feather lodged in the corner of a step. "Do you expect the stones to confess, Poirot?" Japp muttered, pulling his coat tighter. "They confess already, mon ami," Poirot replied serenely. "They say to me, here is no accident, here is artifice. But the artifice cannot be executed by the stone. It is the hand, the mind that we must find. And for that, we must look at those who surround the lady in her final days." With that, Poirot turned from the courthouse steps and requested a private chamber in which to interview the chief persons of interest. Japp grumbled but complied. Within the hour, 4 figures were summoned, each bound to Madeline Fairfax by blood, friendship, law, or desire. They arrived reluctantly, drawn as moths to the flame of suspicion. The first was Philip Fairfax, cousin to the deceased. He was a man in his mid-30s, tall but stooped, his clothing fine yet poorly maintained, as though he had once possessed wealth but had allowed it to fray. His hair, once fashionable, had thinned and clung damply to his forehead. He entered the room with defiance, glaring at the policeman, but the tremor in his hands betrayed unease. "So," Philip sneered, "you drag me here as though I had anything to do with Madeline's melodrama. Let me save you time. I hated her, yes, but hatred is no crime." Poirot regarded him with a steady gaze, hands folded over his cane. "Hatred, monsieur, is no crime. But it is so often the soil in which crime takes root. Tell me, what reason had you to hate her?" Philip's laugh was bitter, hollow. "She cut me off. My ventures, shipping, investments, yes, they failed. But did she lift a finger? No. She called me a fool to my face, said Fairfax blood had curdled in me. And then she paraded her control of the company before all of New York, as if she alone bore with a severe beauty sharpened by the cut of her black gown. She looked more like a widow than a mere friend. Her dark hair was coiffed immaculately, her gloves spotless. She inclined her head politely to Poirot, but did not meet his eyes. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "you were perhaps the closest confidant of Mademoiselle Fairfax. You shared her home, her secrets. Tell me, what shadow lay between you?" Evelyn's voice was smooth, practiced. "Madeleine was impulsive. She trusted too quickly, yet discarded people when they disappointed her. I remained because I was loyal. She trusted me, even when others failed her. And yet, some say you were rivals as well as friends," Poirot pressed softly. "That you competed for influence, for the same circles of admiration." A flicker crossed Evelyn's eyes, pride, perhaps, or resentment. "She was adored. Men fell over themselves to please her. I was invisible, though more capable. But I did not envy her, monsieur. I pitied her." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Pity, madame, can be a sharper blade than envy." She said nothing, only tightened her gloved hands in her lap. The third to arrive was Judge Horace Blackwood, a man of formidable presence even in disarray. His robes had been hastily removed, leaving him in a waistcoat that strained against his girth. His face was florid, his white hair swept back in waves, his eyes bloodshot but still commanding. He carried with him the air of authority, though beneath it, Poirot detected the tremor of unease. "Inspector," Blackwood boomed, "this is irregular. To detain a sitting judge as though I were a common criminal. Intolerable." Poirot inclined his head with exaggerated courtesy. "But, Monsieur le Juge, it is precisely because you are not common that we must speak. Tell me, what awaited Madeleine Fairfax in your courtroom this night?" Blackwood cleared his throat, his jowls quivering. "She was to testify in a matter of import, he said smoothly. "Though I confess, I had hoped our acquaintance might be under more agreeable circumstances." "Life is full of disappointments, monsieur," Poirot replied evenly. "Tell me of your relationship with Mademoiselle Fairfax." Victor's smile deepened, practiced. "We were companions, nothing more. I admired her, of course. Who would not? But she chose otherwise. That is the extent of our history." "Is it so simple?" Poirot asked, eyes narrowing. "There are those who say you proposed marriage, and that she refused. That your finances, monsieur, have recently declined most precipitously. That a union with Madeleine Fairfax would have restored you. Victor's expression did not falter, but his eyes grew colder. Gossip is a cruel mistress, Monsieur Poirot. I did not kill her. To suggest otherwise is absurd. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, studying the man's poise, the deliberate stillness of his hands. Here was control, charm, danger. At last Poirot rose. He looked from one suspect to another, his voice calm but cutting. Monsieur, Madame, you each had reason, hatred, rivalry, fear, desire. The death of Mademoiselle Fairfax is no accident. It was arranged, deliberate. One of you here knows the truth, and I, Hercule Poirot, I will uncover it. The little gray cells, they have already begun their work. The fog pressed against the courthouse windows. Within the chamber, silence reigned, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock. The suspects shifted, each wrapped in their own thoughts, their own lies. And Poirot, small and precise, stood among them like a watchmaker about to reveal which cog in the mechanism had broken and which had been deliberately removed. The investigation deepened. Chapter 3. The First Clue. The courthouse had settled into a tense stillness. Madeleine Fairfax lay in a chamber under watch. The fog pressed against the windows like an intruder denied entry, and the hum of something carefully between two fingers. "Inspector," he said, "we found this near the lady's glove. Almost missed it in the fog." Poirot's eyes sharpened. He gestured. "Bring it here, if you please." The constable placed the object upon the table. It was a scrap of parchment, torn unevenly, no larger than a playing card. Its edges were frayed, and its surface bore faint ink, smudged as though by damp. Poirot bent over it, his nose nearly touching, while Japp leaned in impatiently. The writing, though faded, was still legible. "Stairway at midnight. Final bargain." For a long moment Poirot said nothing. He turned the scrap this way and that, examined the fibers, even sniffed the parchment. Then he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Ah," he said softly, "a rendezvous, a bargain. And where do bargains conclude, mon ami? Where secrets are exchanged, where the night conceals what the day would expose. Mademoiselle Fairfax did not come here by chance. She came to meet someone." Japp frowned. "Could be any one of them suspects, could be none. It mightn't even be hers." Poirot wagged a finger. No, it is hers. See, the crease where it has been folded twice. A lady's glove, small and fitted, would not hold such a scrap unless she herself placed it there. It was a message of import. She kept it upon her person. And now, she is dead." He rose and paced the chamber, his patent leather shoes silent upon the carpet. "The question, mon cher Japp, is not only who arranged this bargain, but what was to be bargained. Money, silence, love, or perhaps the truth itself." At that moment the door opened again and Evelyn March entered. She moved as if drawn unwillingly, her face pale beneath its careful powder, her posture stiff. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I heard there was something found." Poirot regarded her keenly. "Mademoiselle, you are most prompt to know. Come then, look." To the parchment on the table. "What's that then? Her latest theatrics?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You recognize it?" Philip hesitated, then sneered. I've no need to recognize scraps of paper. Madeleine was always scribbling notes, making appointments she'd never keep. Perhaps this was one of them. But the phrase, monsieur, Poirot pressed softly. Final bargain. Does that not strike you as curious? Does it not suggest an ending? Philip's laugh was harsh. Everything with Madeleine was an ending. End of patience, end of loyalty, end of me. If she struck a final bargain, I'm glad she didn't live to boast of it. Poirot's gaze lingered. He made no accusation, only nodded, and Philip stormed out, muttering under his breath. Judge Blackwood was next. He arrived flushed, perspiration beading upon his forehead despite the chill of the chamber. His eyes fell upon the parchment, and at once his handkerchief emerged to blot his brow. "Do you know it, Monsieur le Juge?" Poirot asked, almost kindly. The judge shifted. "A note, that is all." "A note that speaks of a meeting," Poirot said softly. "And who, Judge Blackwood, was to meet with her at midnight? Who had a bargain to strike?" Blackwood's hands trembled slightly as he tucked the handkerchief away. "I cannot answer that. My position—" "Your position," Poirot interrupted gently, "is most precarious. A woman to testify, a ledger of bribes, a death upon your very courthouse steps. And now this scrap." The judge's jowls quivered. He said nothing more, only demanded his release, which Japp granted with reluctance. Poirot watched him go, his eyes narrowed in thought. Last came Victor Hale. He glided into the room as though on stage, his cane clicking softly, his smile fixed. When shown the parchment, he lifted it delicately between his fingers and studied it as though it were a stock certificate. "Curious," he murmured. He paused, eyes narrowing with sudden intensity. "But more than that, the parchment is torn. There is another half. Until we find it, the truth remains only half seen." He tapped the parchment once, decisively, and slipped it into his pocket. "The little gray cells are satisfied. The murderer has revealed himself already, but he waits for us to notice." Japp groaned. "You and your puzzles, Poirot. Well, I hope you're right, because tomorrow the papers will be screaming for answers, and all we've got to show them is a torn scrap of paper." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but mon ami, what a scrap. It is enough to hang a man, or to free him." The fog pressed harder against the courthouse windows, as though eager to smother the truth. But within, Poirot's mind before. A red herring in silk. The night dragged on like a heavy curtain that refused to fall. The courthouse had quieted, its chambers emptied of all but policemen and clerks who moved like ghosts, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls. Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the lamps in halos, pressing cold fingers against the glass. Inside, Hercule Poirot requested one thing alone: to see the private quarters of Madeleine Fairfax. It was not far. The Fairfax family maintained a townhouse adjoining the courthouse square, an elegant residence of dark brick and tall windows, its silhouette blurred by the mist. Poirot, escorted by Inspector Japp and 2 constables, entered with measured steps. The air was heavy with perfume, jasmine, faintly cloying, and the faint odor of extinguished candles. "Like a mausoleum," Japp muttered, tugging off his gloves. "Rich folk always keep houses like museums. No warmth, no life. On the contrary, mon ami, Poirot murmured, his eyes darting to every corner. There is life here still, the life of secrets. And secrets, they are most talkative to the eyes that see. The drawing room was immaculate, though Poirot noted a teacup abandoned on a side table, the lipstick faint against the porcelain rim. Poirot had already moved to the dressing table. Upon it lay a small vial, glass and stopper intact, its label yellowed with age. He lifted it delicately. "Laudanum," he murmured. Jap's eyes narrowed. "Opium tincture. Dangerous stuff. Enough of it could stop a heart quick as anything." He rounded on Evelyn. "And what's it doing here, in your possession?" Evelyn's composure faltered. It was mine. For sleeplessness. A doctor prescribed it years ago. I had forgotten it was here." Poirot studied her face. The hesitation, the pale skin, the gloved hands twisting together. He held the vial up to the light. Only a few drops remained, dark and viscous. "Curious," he said softly. "It is old, as you say. The residue clings to the glass. But look, there is dust upon the stopper, thick enough to prove it has not been opened in months. If poison it was to be, it was not poured from here." Jap frowned. "Then what's your point, Poirot? It's laudanum. That alone is enough to tie her to poison." "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied sharply. "Evidence is like a mirror. It shows us truth, but reversed. This vial, it shouts too loudly. It is a clue that wishes to be found. That, to Poirot, is the mark of a red herring." Evelyn's breath escaped in a shudder. "You believe me, then?" "I believe," Poirot said, his mustache twitching, "that you conceal something, but not murder." His eyes moved to the wardrobe. He crossed the room in 3 brisk steps and opened it. Dresses in silk and satin cascaded from their hangers, their colors subdued in the lamplight. Poirot's hand, precise and unerring, pulled at one sleeve. From behind the row of gowns he withdrew a folded square of fabric. A scarf. Silk, soft and luminous, monogrammed with the initials M.F. "Ah, the bottle. It escapes." Jap muttered under his breath, but Poirot held up a finger. "Do not press her, mon ami. To press too hard is to shatter the glass. Let her keep her silence, for now. The little gray cells will find their way without it." Chapter 5. The Tangle of Motives. The following morning dawned bleakly over New York, the pale light of early sun creeping timidly through the gray veil of mist that clung stubbornly to the courthouse. The scene, so dramatic in its nocturnal terror, had now become subdued, hushed almost, as though the city itself was reluctant to speak of what had occurred. Yet talk it did, in every corner of Queens and Manhattan. Newspapers carried the scandal on their front pages, crowds gathered to speculate in lowered voices, and still, Hercule Poirot sat quietly in his room at the Belmont Hotel, sipping a small cup of coffee and adjusting his mustaches with all the solemnity of a man for whom the world's confusion was a familiar melody. It was here that Captain Hastings found him, standing by the window, surveying the restless streets below. Hastings, stalwart companion, though often bewildered, had spent a restless night himself, his mind turning ceaselessly over the strange disappearance of Miss Eleanor Van Horn and the yet stranger murder that had followed in her wake. When he entered, Poirot did not turn immediately, but lifted one delicate hand, signaling for silence. "My friend," he said softly, "New York is awake. Do you hear? It hums, it breathes, it speculates. And yet, it does not know. It does not see. That is where we come in." Hastings sat down heavily, exhaling a long breath. "I confess, Poirot, I don't see much more than the man in the street. Eleanor Van Horn vanished into thin air, and poor Mr. Caldwell was murdered not an hour later. The police are chasing shadows." Poirot at last turned, his eyes bright with that familiar light Hastings had come to associate with the scent of a puzzle. "Mais oui, shadows. But remember, Hastings, shadows cannot exist without light. One must only ask, where is the light source? What casts these peculiar shapes? That, mon ami, is the question." By midday, Poirot had arranged to meet Inspector O'Malley at the courthouse. The inspector was a stout man, brusque in manner, but not gaze never resting in one place, but flicking, bird-like, from shadow to cornice, from railing to paving stone. Hastings, trudging alongside, felt increasingly bewildered. Surely, Poirot, she must have been taken into one of the surrounding buildings. Or beneath them, Poirot murmured. Or even through them. There are many possibilities, mon ami, if one only possesses imagination. O'Malley snorted. "Imagination doesn't close cases, monsieur. Facts do." "Ah, but imagination guides us to the facts, Inspector," Poirot replied mildly. They entered the great hall, its marble floors echoing beneath their steps. Poirot paused, turning slowly, as if listening to a tune only he could hear. At last he said, "Let us examine not only where Miss Van Horn went, but why she vanished at all. This is the question we must pursue." That afternoon, Poirot conducted a series of interviews with those closest to the missing heiress. It was here, among the web of strained relationships and whispered confidences, that the tangled skein of motives began to reveal itself. The first to be summoned was Gregory Van Horn, Eleanor's elder brother. Tall, stern, with a face carved as though from stone, Gregory exuded an air of authority tinged with impatience. "I hardly see why I must answer questions again," he declared, settling into a chair across from Poirot. "I have already told the police everything I know." "Perhaps, monsieur," Poirot replied gently. "But you have not yet told Hercule Poirot everything. And that is a very different thing." Gregory's mouth tightened, but he inclined his head stiffly. "Very well. Ask what you will." Poirot folded his hands. "Your sister, monsieur, was to inherit a considerable fortune, was she not?" "She was," Gregory admitted curtly. "Our father, God rest him, saw fit to bestow the lion's share upon Eleanor. I cannot pretend it was just, but I accept simply too dreadful. Eleanor was like a sister to me. I cannot believe she is gone." Poirot regarded her kindly. "You cared deeply for her, I see." "Indeed, I did. We attended every ball together, every theater. She was radiant, always radiant. I could never hope to rival her, of course. Rival her, Poirot repeated, his gaze sharpening. In what way, mademoiselle? Oh, socially, I suppose. She had the beauty, the charm, the fortune. Gentlemen flocked to her. I was often overlooked. There was bitterness beneath the sweetness of her tone, and Poirot did not miss it. And were there gentlemen, mademoiselle, whom you particularly regretted losing to her? A faint blush stained Lydia's cheeks. Perhaps one or two. But Eleanor never meant harm. It was simply her nature to captivate. Poirot inclined his head, but when Lydia departed he murmured, jealousy. It is a green poison, mon ami. Subtle, but deadly. The third interview was with Richard Caldwell's sister, Mrs. Harriet Wilson, a severe woman in black who carried herself with rigid dignity. She spoke without tears, her voice controlled. My brother was a good man, Monsieur Poirot. He was Eleanor's attorney and confidant. If he is dead, it is because he knew something dangerous. Poirot's eyes gleamed. What sort of thing, madame? She hesitated. I cannot be certain. But Richard was troubled of late. He spoke of papers, of documents that must not fall into the wrong hands. He said Eleanor's safety depended upon them. Documents. Poirot leaned closer. What documents? I do not know, monsieur. He would not tell me. But he feared betrayal from someone close to Eleanor. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. As Mrs. Wilson departed, Poirot tapped the table thoughtfully. So, there are papers, there is betrayal, and there is death. The plot thickens, Hastings, like a fine soup. Hastings groaned softly, twitched. Not yet. But soon, Hastings. Very soon. The pieces are moving, and Hercule Poirot is watching the board. The following day, Poirot insisted on returning to the courthouse steps at precisely the same hour of Eleanor's disappearance. The psychology, Hastings, it is most important. We must see what she saw, feel what she felt, at the exact moment. A small crowd had gathered, curious to watch the famous detective at work. Poirot ignored them, his eyes fixed on the great stone steps. He climbed slowly, paused at the top, then turned, just as Eleanor must have done. What do you see, Hastings? He asked softly. Why, nothing but the street, the cabs, the passers-by. Precisely. And yet, she vanished. Consider, mon ami. For a woman to disappear thus, one of two things must occur. Either she goes willingly to someone she trusts, or she is compelled in a manner so swift, so subtle, it escapes all notice. Hastings frowned. You think she knew her abductor? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It is possible. Or perhaps it was not abduction at all. Perhaps she chose to vanish. Hastings stared. But why would she? Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he stooped, examining a faint mark near the railing. He traced it with one finger, then straightened, his expression thoughtful. There is much yet to learn, Hastings. But we are closer, I think. Much closer. That evening, Poirot convened a private meeting in his suite, inviting Inspector O'Malley and several of the key figures. Gregory Van Horn, Lydia Marchmont, Mrs. Wilson, and the rejected suitor, Mr. Jonathan Reed, were all present, each visibly on edge. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small frame commanding unexpected authority. Mesdames et messieurs, we are gathered because the truth draws near. Already I see the pattern forming, though some details remain blurred, but make no mistake, the murderer is among us. There was a collective intake of breath, and Hastings swore he saw Lydia pale. One answered. The room seemed to tighten, the air heavy with suspicion. At last Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but that, mes amis, is the beauty of a mystery. We have assembled the pieces. Soon the picture will be clear. When at last the gathering dispersed, Hastings turned to his friend in exasperation. Poirot, why summon them if you are not ready to name the culprit? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Because, Hastings, it is most instructive to observe the reactions, the shifting of eyes, the trembling of hands. Already I know more than I did this morning. And do you know who it is? Poirot only smiled. Patience, mon ami. The little gray cells are working. Soon, very soon, we shall unmask the truth. Hastings sighed, knowing better than to press further. Yet as he glanced out the window at the darkening city, he felt a chill creep down his spine. The tangle of motives was indeed thick, but somewhere within it lay a killer, watching, waiting, perhaps even planning their next move. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Fog. The fog that blanketed Queens on the morning of Poirot's 6th day in America clung thick as wool to the courthouse steps. It curled in and out of the balustrades, softened the hard lines of the stone columns, and obscured the street lamps so that they glowed like faintly smoldering coals. It was, Poirot mused, a most theatrical veil, ideal for both concealment and revelation. He stood with Hastings at his side, cane tucked neatly beneath his arm, watching the faint silhouettes of passers-by drift ghost-like through the mist. Hastings shivered and pulled his collar up. Ghastly weather. You can hardly see a yard ahead. It feels as though something, or someone, might leap out at any moment. Exactly, mon ami. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Such weather encourages the imagination. It whispers possibilities to the mind. And imagination, as you know, is a friend most loyal to Hercule Poirot. But the facts, Poirot, Hastings protested. We've more suspects than solutions, and all with motives, as you— Delicate finger on the table. Tell me, what of Gregory Van Horn? O'Malley flipped a page. Spent the night at his club. Left after midnight, returned at 3. Plenty of witnesses. And Lydia Marchmont. Ah. O'Malley's expression darkened. She was seen leaving her apartment just before midnight. Didn't return until nearly dawn. Claims she was at a friend's soirée on 5th Avenue, but no one seems to remember her there. Très intéressant, murmured Poirot. And Mr. Jonathan Reed, drinking himself into stupor at O'Connell's tavern. Too many witnesses to doubt it. Poirot leaned back. So, Lydia Marchmont wanders alone in the fog and returns with no satisfactory explanation. A curious thing, n'est-ce pas? O'Malley grunted. You think she's our woman? Poirot only smiled, his mustache twitching. I think, Inspector, that she has secrets. And secrets are like fog. They obscure, but also they reveal. Later, back at the Belmont, Hastings burst in with a scrap of news. Poirot, you won't believe it. A cab driver has come forward. Says he picked up a young lady near the courthouse on the night Eleanor vanished. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now— Poirot lifted a hand. Calm yourself, mon ami. Describe this young lady. Hastings flushed. He said she wore a heavy veil, dark cloak, and spoke little. But he's certain she was a society type, not a commoner. He drove her to the riverfront. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The riverfront. Always, Hastings, it is the river. A place to vanish, a place to dispose of that which must not be found. Did the cab driver recall which pier? Pier 17, Hastings replied. But he couldn't say more. Poirot rose swiftly. Come, Hastings, to the river. There we may find whispers hidden in the fog. Pier 17 lay desolate in the lake accord. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Perhaps someone aided her. The fog conceals many truths, Hastings. The next day brought another revelation. Mrs. Harriet Wilson called upon Poirot, her face drawn and eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. She carried a small leather case. Setting it down with trembling hands, she said, Monsieur Poirot, these were my brothers. The police overlooked them. I found them hidden in his desk. Poirot opened the case. Inside were letters, legal documents, and one thin sheaf marked confidential. He studied them in silence, his brows arching as he read. At last he looked up. Ah, madame, you were correct. Your brother indeed feared betrayal. Hastings leaned over curiously. What do they say, Poirot? Poirot held up one letter. It is a draft of a codicil to Mr. Van Horn's will. It would have altered the inheritance yet again, reducing Eleanor's share, redistributing portions to Gregory, to Lydia, even to Charity. If Eleanor signed it, she would have remained wealthy, yes, but not to the same unexpected deeper, same extravagant degree. Mrs. Wilson's voice broke. He told me he was safeguarding Eleanor, that she wished to be free of the fortune's burden. But if others discovered these papers— Poirot nodded. They would have motive indeed to silence him. Merci, madame. You have done well. After she departed, Hastings exclaimed, That settles it, Poirot. Gregory or Lydia must have killed Caldwell to keep the codicil from being executed. Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. The presence of motive is not proof of guilt. We must not rush. Remember, it is always the psychology, the human nature, that leads to truth. That evening, Poirot arranged to meet Lydia Marchmont again. She arrived at the Belmont cloaked in furs, eyes red as though from tears. Poirot received her courteously, offering tea. For some minutes he allowed her to chatter nervously. Then at last he said quietly, Mademoiselle, where were you truly on the night Miss Van Horn vanished? Days later, the fog finally broke, giving way to a cold, clear dawn. Poirot summoned Hastings for a walk along the East River. The detective seemed restless, almost impatient, his steps brisk. Poirot, what are we doing here at this ungodly hour? Poirot stopped at the railing, gazing out at the glittering water. We are watching the current, mon ami. It carries things, conceals things, delivers things. As does the current of human motive. Do you not see? Hastings frowned. I see a river. Poirot chuckled. And I see a story. A young heiress, burdened by fortune. A lawyer who holds her trust. Relatives torn between love and resentment. A city of fog and whispers. Somewhere among them, Hastings, is the hand that struck. Already I begin to see its outline. Hastings grew exasperated. "Then who, Poirot? Who is it?" Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the river. "Patience, Hastings. The little gray cells have almost completed their work. But first, I must speak once more to Gregory Van Horn, for in his anger he revealed more than he intended." He turned, the morning sun catching his mustache in a glint of gold. "Come, Hastings, the truth is near, and when it emerges, it will shine as brightly as this sun breaking through the fog." Chapter 7. The Suitor's Alibi. The Fairfax affair had become the talk of the city. Every newspaper bore headlines shrieking of scandal. Every corner cafe buzzed with speculation. And yet, Hercule Poirot moved through the noise as though in silence, the threads of the case weaving themselves within his little gray cells. His next call was upon Victor Hale, the rejected suitor, the man whose charm had soured into bitterness when fortune abandoned him. Hale resided in a handsome residence along Fifth Avenue, though the grandeur had begun to slip. The carpets were worn, the gilt on the picture frames dulled, and the servants fewer than one might expect. Yet Hale himself, mantle, carefully staged. And there, by the umbrella stand, Hale's cane. It was a handsome object of ebony, silver-tipped, its handle carved into the head of a falcon. Poirot's hand hovered near it, then, with Hale's reluctant nod, lifted it. He weighed it, turned it, examined the intricate carvings, and then, with the deftness of a conjurer, pressed his finger against a minute notch. The handle twisted. A compartment slid open. Inside lay a scrap of parchment, folded small. Poirot withdrew it, smoothed it gently, and read the faint ink. "Final bargain." Jap whistled. "By God, it matches the one we found on Madeline." Hale's composure cracked. He reached out, but Poirot held the paper just beyond his grasp. "Monsieur Hale," Poirot said softly, "when a man dines at a restaurant, he does not carry scraps of clandestine notes in hidden compartments. No, this is the relic of a rendezvous that ended in death." Hale's voice sharpened. "It is nothing, a trifle. She was always writing notes, dramatic little messages. I kept this one, as a memory." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "A memory, yes, but of what? A promise unkept? A threat unfulfilled? Or the very hour of her destruction?" Hale drew himself up, his eyes flashing with indignation. "I loved her. Do you understand? Loved her with a passion she never returned. She chose wealth over loyalty, society over sincerity. I was cast aside like an old glove. Do you wonder that I kept a token, a mere scrap, to remind me of what was lost?" Jap's voice was grim. "We'll need you to account for every minute of that night, every soul who saw you, every word you spoke." Hale sneered. "Do as you like. My alibi will hold." But Poirot, still holding the cane, shook his head. "Perhaps. But remember, monsieur, the murderer is like a dramatist. He writes his play with props and costumes, with alibis and distractions. Yet the stage always betrays him, tolling the hour. And somewhere within that tumult, Poirot felt it. The murderer's fear, rising like the tide, soon to break. Chapter 8. The Psychology of Fear. The night after Victor Hale's interrogation, Poirot sat alone in his suite at the Astoria Hotel, staring into the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes like living jewels. Yet his mind was elsewhere. His little gray cells turned restlessly, teasing apart the threads of the Fairfax case. Each suspect, each alibi, each clue. They were fragments of a puzzle, and the picture they formed was still obscured. Poirot leaned back in his chair. "It is fear," he murmured to himself. "Yes, fear is the key. Each of them wears a mask, but beneath the mask lies terror. Terror of discovery, of ruin, of exposure. And it is in the psychology of fear that the truth will out." When Japp arrived the next morning, he found Poirot studying a series of notes pinned upon the wall. Each bore the name of a suspect: Evelyn March, Philip Fairfax, Victor Hale, and others, and beneath each a list of their fears. "What's this, Poirot? A rogues gallery?" Japp asked. "Not rogues, mon ami," Poirot replied smoothly. "Human beings, each a prisoner of his own fear. Observe, Miss March, she fears disgrace. She is the loyal secretary, the custodian of secrets. If Madeleine lived, her debts would be revealed. If Madeleine died, suspicion would fall upon her. Voila, fear upon both sides. Then Philip Fairfax, he fears poverty, the gambler who must mask his ruin with bravado. He had motive, but motive does not always translate to action. And Hale fears irrelevance, to be cast aside, to be forgotten. Such fear breeds hatred." Japp frowned. "And you think fear will point us to the killer?" "Mais oui. Fear leaves traces more indelible than fingerprints. A man may lie, he may construct an alibi, but his fear, it leaks through every gesture." Surprise. Such little accidents, such little nerves. One might almost think the presence of others inspires discomfort. The three said nothing. Fear, Poirot noted, had entered the room and seated itself among them. Later, as the gathering broke up, Poirot contrived to walk Evelyn March to her motor car. He leaned close, his voice low and confidential. "Mademoiselle, you are afraid. Afraid of what you know, or of what others suspect you know. Do not let fear consume you, for it betrays more surely than guilt." Her eyes filled with sudden tears, and she whispered, "I tried to protect her, Monsieur Poirot. I truly did. But she was determined, always determined. And now I am left with nothing but shame." Poirot laid a gentle hand upon her arm. "Courage, mademoiselle. The truth may yet set you free." That evening, Poirot reported to Japp. "The murderer's psychology reveals itself, mon ami. It is not only love, not only greed, not only inheritance. It is fear of exposure, fear of being seen for what one truly is. The one who killed Madeleine Fairfax did so not for gain alone, but because her survival threatened their very identity. That is why she died upon the courthouse steps, a stage, a spectacle, a warning to others." Japp rubbed his chin. "You mean it wasn't just murder, it was a message?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Precisely. And that, mon ami, narrows the field. For only one among them thrives upon theater, upon spectacle, upon playing a part too perfect. Soon, very soon, the mask will slip." He turned back to the fire, the same flames flickering in his dark eyes. Fear was his ally now. and through fear he would drive the killer into the open. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The city of New York thrummed with unease as the 9th day of Eleanor Van Horn's disappearance dawned. The newspapers no longer headquarters later that day. The Irishman looked more harried than ever, cigar chewed nearly to pulp. He shoved a sheaf of photographs across his desk. "From the pier," he growled. "We dredged the river again. Found these items wedged between pilings. A lady's glove, torn. A silver cigarette case, monogrammed R.C. And this scrap of paper, waterlogged but legible enough. Part of a legal draft." Poirot examined them carefully. "The glove is Eleanor's, I believe. The case, Richard Caldwell's. And the paper, mais oui, from the codicil your men overlooked." Hastings exclaimed, "Then Caldwell must have met Eleanor at the river. Perhaps he meant to show her the papers." "Or perhaps," Poirot murmured, "someone else meant to show her. And he paid with his life." O'Malley slammed his fist. "Damn it, Poirot, I need an arrest. The press are making fools of us." Poirot folded the glove gently. "Patience, Inspector. The net is tightening. A storm gathers. Better to let it break upon the guilty than cast it too soon." That evening, Poirot invited Gregory Van Horn, Lydia Marchmont, Jonathan Reed, and Mrs. Wilson once again to the Belmont suite. Hastings felt a thrill of anticipation, for he knew his friends seldom assembled suspects without cause. The atmosphere was taut as wire. Gregory paced like a caged beast. Lydia fluttered nervously with her handkerchief. Reed scowled into his drink, and Mrs. Wilson sat stiff and silent in widow's black. Poirot took his place before them, immaculate as ever, eyes gleaming beneath arched brows. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "we approach the end. Soon the truth will be revealed. But first, I must speak of storms. Do you know what a storm does? It clears the air. It strips away disguises. It lays bare the earth beneath. Such is the storm that now descends upon us." They stirred uneasily. Poirot went on. "Motive. Each conceals truth. But tonight I expect the storm will draw one forth. Wait, Hastings. The lightning will strike." And as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the Belmont, it seemed to Hastings that the whole city itself awaited the same storm, shuddering on the brink of revelation. Chapter 10. Curtain falls. The dawn after Philip Fairfax's confession broke over New York in a haze of pale gold and shadow. The city stirred awake with the clamor of carriages, the clanging of trams, and the hoarse cries of newspaper boys hawking the latest scandal. Headlines blared, "Heiress Murder Solved, Gambler Brother in Custody." For the public, the play was finished. But for those who had stood upon the stage, the echoes lingered still. At the Astoria Hotel, Poirot sat with his morning chocolate, mustaches groomed with exquisite precision. Japp slouched opposite him, newspaper open, eyes narrowed. "Well, Poirot," Japp muttered, "you've done it again. Though I'll say this much, it wasn't an easy nut to crack. Hale, March, even the girl herself with all her secrets. For a while I thought every one of 'em had a hand in it." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but in the end, the little gray cells, they bring clarity. One sees not only the actions, but the psychology. The murderer reveals himself not only by what he does, but by what he fears. Jap grunted. Fear, eh? Can't say I put much stock in psychology. Give me evidence, witnesses, fingerprints. But you, he waved the paper. You saw through the alibis, the posturing, the tears. I'll hand it to you, Poirot. You were right. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, mon ami. Yet do not think Poirot delights in being right when it brings such sorrow. The poor Mademoiselle March, she loses her dearest companion. And Monsieur Hale, though innocent of the crime, he remains imprisoned in the bitterness of rejection. Each one suffers. The law condemns only the guilty, but life punishes us all. Jap shifted uneasily. You gave her loyalty. That is no small gift. Tears slid down her cheeks. What shall I do now, Monsieur Poirot? My position, my reputation, without her, I am nothing. Poirot's gaze was steady. You are not nothing. You are Evelyn March, a woman who has endured sorrow and yet lives. Grief may bend you, but it need not break you. Go forward, mademoiselle. Live not in fear, but in strength. That is what Madeline would have wished. Evelyn bowed her head, silent. In the days that followed, the city moved on. Society whispered of the Fairfax scandal, then turned to newer gossip. But Poirot lingered a while in New York, reflecting. One evening he walked alone by the courthouse steps where Madeline had died. The lamplight cast long shadows. The marble gleamed faintly beneath the moon. Here, fear had struck. Here, the gambler's final wager had been made. Poirot removed his hat, bowing his head. Adieu, mademoiselle. You played your part with courage, even in death. And from your tragedy, the truth was born. As he turned to leave, the clock in the courthouse tower struck the hour. The sound was solemn, echoing across the silent streets like the tolling of destiny. Poirot paused, his gaze lifting to the night sky. The curtain falls, he murmured. But another play begins. And Poirot, he will be there, ever watchful, until the last act is played. He walked into the shadows, his figure small against the vast city, yet his presence indelible. A solitary guardian of truth in a world forever staging its dramas of love, greed, and fear.